Alright, what is up you guys, and welcome back to the 98 English course. In today's recording we're going to be going over Unit 8. Here we have Art and Literature. So let's hop in with the key vocabulary. Here we have action film, actor, actress, adventure, author, autobiography, cartoon, character, comedy, crime, crime film, direct, director, drama, favorite, historical film, horror film, love story, novel, play, role, scene, science fiction, sci-fi, set. Okay? Now let's go to the listening section here, lesson 1. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. So here we have 8 old film posters, right? And here we have some words. Here we have comedy, cartoon, love story, science fiction, crime, historical, horror, and adventure. So all of these are movie genres, right? So let's take a look here. Let me open this so you guys can get a better view, right? So we're gonna match the story types based on these posters, right? So 1 here, A, is obviously a cartoon, right? You can clearly see. So A is cartoon. 2, I think we're talking about history here, right? So we'll say historical. So B is historical. Then we have C. This is obviously based on science fiction, so we'll say C, science fiction. D, this one looks like love, so we'll say a love story, so D. E, what is E? I think E looks like crime. I think so, yeah. So E is crime, so we'll say crime. And F looks like a horror movie, right? Something that's scary, so we'll say horror movie, right? And G, this looks like pure comedy, so we'll say comedy. And finally, adventure for the H, the last one. Okay? Now let's take a look and see what else do we have. Here we have listen and match each extract with one of the posters. So let's take a look here. Let's listen to this. I want you guys to take out a sticky note or your notes and start making some notes because we will need them. Here we go.
112. Unit 8. Art and Literature. Lesson 1. Listening. Exercise A2. Listen and match each extract with one of the posters.
1.
In this kind of film, people often go on a journey. They must find something or someone. There are many dangers along the way. Sometimes they're in a difficult situation and they're in danger of dying.
2.
In this kind of story, there is a mystery. Someone is dead and the question is, who did it? The main character is a policeman or a private detective.
3.
This kind of film makes you frightened. People do frightening things or suddenly appear and make you jump.
4.
This kind of film is set in the past. There are often kings or queens and famous events from history.
5.
This kind of story has drawings. The drawings move. Nowadays, the drawings are usually made by computer.
6.
This kind of story is often very simple. One person loves another person, but for some reason they cannot be together. The idea is very simple, but very popular.
7.
This kind of story is set in the future. There are often spaceships and people from other planets. Sometimes people from the Earth go to another planet. Sometimes people from another planet come to the Earth.
8.
This kind of story makes you laugh. People do funny things or say funny things.
Right, so based on the audio that we just heard here, So I think I'll actually play it one more time, right? Just in case, because I personally didn't get all of it. So I'll play it one more time and then we'll go ahead.
1. Listening. Exercise A2. Listen and match each extract with one of the posters.
1,
In this kind of film, people often go on a journey. They must find something or someone. There are many dangers along the way. Sometimes they're in a difficult situation and they're in danger of dying.
2,
In this kind of story, there is a mystery. Someone is dead, and the question is, who did it? The main character is a policeman or a private detective.
3,
This kind of film makes you frightened. People do frightening things, or suddenly appear and make you jump.
4,
This kind of film is set in the past. There are often kings or queens and famous events from history.
5,
This kind of story has drawings. The drawings move. Nowadays, the drawings are usually made by computer.
6,
This kind of story is often very simple. One person loves another person, but for some reason they cannot be together. The idea is very simple, but very popular.
7,
This kind of story is set in the future. There are often spaceships and people from other planets. Sometimes people from the Earth go to another planet. Sometimes people from another planet come to the Earth.
8,
This kind of story makes you laugh. People do funny things or say funny things.
Alright, so based on the audio here, I actually numbered them down. So here we have A, which is obviously the cartoon film. So we'll say that's, what was it? A was paragraph, or not paragraph, sorry. It was section 5 of the recording, right? And then we have B, which was the poster's talking about, or the film is talking about history. So for B, we'll say, I think it was 4, right? Number 4. So 5, B was 4. C, which is science fiction, we'll say it was number 7. D, and that's kind of the reason why I told you guys to take out a sticky note or take notes, is because I wanted to see how you guys would do if just didn't solve the exercise while the audio was playing in the background, right? So A, 5, B, 4, C, 7. I think D will be section 6, right? And E was 2? Yeah, 2 if I recall correctly. And F, obviously the horror movie, will be 3. G, which is comedy, we'll say 8. It was the final one. And finally, we have H, which was 1. Okay? So A5, B4, C7, D6, E2, F3, G8, H1. Okay? What else do we have? Did you understand the keywords and phrases in the blue box in context? So, if you guys heard, so the audio, in the audio you probably heard the word mystery, or make you jump, set, character, and laugh. So here, mystery probably means it's a mysterious movie, right? As in something that you don't know what's gonna happen, right? Same thing goes with make you jump. I don't mean to make you jump literally, as in jump to the sky. No. What I mean here is I'll scare you, right? The movie will scare you, aka make you jump. Okay? Then we have set as a verb here, which means to put a character, or basically someone or something, in a place. Okay? So that's what set means here in this context. Obviously, a character is someone from the movie, and finally, laugh, right? Something that makes you laugh, which in this case was the movie. Okay? So that was exercise A, you guys. Now let's move on. Here we have exercise B. Look at table 1 below and figure 1 opposite. Here, let us check this. Alright, so what information do you expect to hear? Right, so take a look at the tables here, right? So here we have a table and we have a pie chart about the bestsellers in English in paperbacks 2002. Okay, so what do you guys expect to hear? So I think this is going to be a research report. It's actually here, right? So let's listen. Again, it's 3 minutes long, almost 3.5 minutes long. So take out your notes and start taking notes, okay? Take out anything and just start writing. So here we go.
113. Exercise B2. Listen to a research report. Predict the next word when the recording stops. Then complete Table 1.
I'm doing research into reading habits in English. I wanted to find out the most popular types of books in the English language. I looked for information in libraries and on the internet. On the website of the Guardian newspaper, I found a list of best-selling paperback books for the year 2002. I looked at the top 50 books in the list and I put them into separate categories: crime, adventure, horror, etc. Most of the categories are novels, but there are also biographies or life stories and autobiographies, life stories written by the people themselves. There is also the category Other, which means true stories, cookery books, etc. If you look at Table 1, you will see my results. I found that 2 types of novel were far more popular than the rest. In fact, these 2 types appear 31 times in the Guardian list of the first 50 bestsellers. In other words, they account for over 60% of the total. In first place with 17 out of 50 titles, that's 34%, is crime novels. Second, with only 3 fewer titles, we have love stories. In equal third place with 4 titles each are science fiction, autobiography, and comedy novels. Just behind those 3 types we have historical novels with 3 titles, then horror and other with 2, and finally adventure and biography with 1 each.
Alright, so based on the audio, I actually solved it. Just, I don't know, I thought it was easy enough, so no problems. So basically, we have different book types, and based on his research about the bestsellers in English in paperbacks 2002, so we have the different book types like adventure, biography, autobiography, comedy, crime, historical, horror, love story, science fiction, and other, right? So the total was 1, right? And it was 4. So Pirates, Lord Nation, 1 and 4 each. My Life, I think this is in cinema. I can't read that. I can't see. It was 1, right? Comedy was at 4. Horror was at 2. This was history. Yeah, history at 3. Crime novels were at 17, which is insane. Love story was at 3. Other was at 2. And sci-fi was at 4. Now, here's where taking notes is really important. So, here we have this pie chart, and based on the book type, which one was the biggest, you guys? That's correct. It was crime, right? So crime was the biggest. What about something that's, you know, just a little bit smaller, but still huge compared to the rest? That's correct. It was love. We'll say love stories. Okay? What about this part right here? What do you guys think? We'll definitely say science fiction, right? What's something that's the exact same? We'll probably say autobiographies, right? Autobiographies. Something that's again the same. We'll say comedy, right? Comedy, and let's actually check comedy here. Where is comedy? Comedy's at 4 as well, so we got that right. What's something that's slightly smaller? I think it was historical. Yeah, it was historical at 3. So historical. Again, something that's slightly smaller. We'll say horror. Wrote that one down. After that, I think it was adventure. Yeah, yeah, it was adventure. So we'll say adventure. All right. Something that's like adventure is biographies, actually. So we'll say biographies again. Or, sorry, this was autobiographies. This one's biographies. And the final one will be other, right? Simply book types that were not mentioned in this research. Okay, so crime, love stories, science fiction, autobiographies, comedy, historical, horror, adventure, biographies, and other. Okay, so that was exercise B, you guys. Now let's move on. What do we have here? Right, so listen to the introduction to some research. Let's take a look here. Alright, so we're gonna listen. Alright, what I want you guys to do is we're gonna be listening to an introduction to some research. What I want you guys to do is, there's gonna be a lot of notes in this one, guys, so take out a notebook, right? Again, notes, but I want you to make a table that has a slot for date, slot for name and country, number, age, and tasks 1 and 2, okay? So draw that and let's hop right in.
114. Exercise C1. Listen. Make notes in your notebook under the following headings: date, name and country, number, age, tasks 1 and 2.
I'm going to talk about some research into types of films. In 1996, an American psychologist, Dr. Stuart Fishoff, that's Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, Fishoff, F-I-S-C-H-O-F-F, did some research into films.
Right, so just before we move on, for the slot of the date, we'll now say 1996, right? And for the name and country, we'll say Dr. Stuart Fishoff, and we still don't know his country yet, so let's check this out.
He talked to 560 people in the USA.
Right, so now we just heard that he is in the USA, so we'll say, for the country, we'll say USA, and for the number, we'll say 560. So far, so good.
There were 264 men and 296 women. They were between 15 and 83 years old. He asked them to put different types of film in order, with one as their favourite. He also asked them to name their favourite film of all time. We can see some of the results of the research in the tables on the screen.
Alright, so for number, we're going to now continue. So we said that he talked to 560 people. 264 of those were male, and 296 were female. And for age, we'll say that they were between the age of 15 and 83. Right? What about tasks 1 and 2? Well, he told them to put types of film in order, right? So 1 was their favorite film, right? And for the second film, he wanted to know what was their favorite film of all time. Okay? So again, date 1996, name and country Dr. Stuart Fishoff, USA, number 560, 264 were male, 296 were female, age between 15 and 83. Tasks 1 and 2 will say he put types of film in order, so 1, right? Slot 1 was your favorite film, and second was your favorite film of all time. Okay? We got that part out of the way. Let's go to 2. So listen, which word in the tables below does the speaker explain, and what is the explanation? Alright, so here we have some tables, table 1, 2, and 3, right? By order of preference, and which one or which word in the tables of these is the speaker talking about, and what's the explanation? So here, let's have a listen.
115. Exercise C2. Listen. Which word in the tables below does the speaker explain? What is the explanation?
I must explain one word in these tables. The word is drama. Dr. Fishoff used traditional categories for film types: love story, science fiction, crime, etc. But he also made a special category called drama. A drama is usually a story at the theatre. But Dr. Fishoff used this name for a particular type of film. In drama films, people have a problem and they try to solve it. Sometimes there's a crime in a drama story, but it isn't the main point of the story. Sometimes love is part of a drama film, but it isn't the main part. In most cases, the problem is actually with the people. Dramas teach us about life. Dr. Fishoff found that a lot of popular films were dramas, not just crime stories, love stories, and so on.
Right, so based on what we just heard, the word that the speaker explains is drama, right? And what is the explanation for drama? Well, it's a type of film, and it's usually within the people themselves in the film, right? So people have a problem in the film, and they try to solve it. And drama teaches us about life, so it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily about love, for example. It could be about crime, love, anything else, comedy even, but it just means that the other genre is not the main point or that the director is trying to make, but rather that there's hardships in life and how you can overcome them, right? So that was the explanation. Look at the tables. What do you expect to hear? Alright, so I think based on these, we already heard it, so we'll say the favorite types of film, right? Because we have the percentage and the different types of films, okay? So that was exercise C. Now let's move on. What do we have here? Exercise D, you're going to hear the results of a research, right? So we're going to listen and now complete table 1, right? So film types by order of preference, okay? We have the different types and which order are they in. Here we go.
116. Exercise D1. Listen and complete table 1.
Dr. Fishoff asked the first question to all 560 people. Can you put these types of film in order of preference? For example, if you like love stories the most, put 1. The results are in table 1. He found that drama films were the most popular. In second place were adventure films, and in third, sci-fi. Love stories were next, and then comedy films in 5th place. In 6th place were cartoons, followed by horror films. Surprisingly, crime stories were in 8th and last place.
Alright, so based on what we just started, I actually wrote some of these down, but I didn't have enough time to write them on the computer. So cartoon was around number, cartoon was number 6, and comedy was 5. That's my bad. Okay, and drama was number 1, right, and science fiction was number 3. Okay, so adventure was number 2, cartoon was number 6, comedy order number 5, crime 8, drama 1, horror 7, love story 4, and science fiction 3. Okay, now let's listen, and we're going to complete tables 2 and 3, favorite types of film by females and favorite types of film by males. Right, here we go.
117. Exercise D2. Listen and complete Table 2 or Table 3.
Dr. Fishoff then asked the second question. Can you name your favourite film of all time? The results for women are in Table 2, and for men in Table 3. Not surprisingly, love stories came top for women. 31% of women named love stories as their favourite type of film, compared with only 4% of men. In second place for women were drama films. 23% chose this type. For men, drama films were top, with 32% saying it was their favourite film type. Science fiction and adventure films were in equal second place for men, with 28% choosing both types. Women put science fiction third. 16% chose this type of film, and adventure fourth. 15% chose this type. Cartoons were next for both men and women, but with only 4% saying it was their favourite film type. Horror, comedy, and crime stories got no result at all for either sex. None of the men or women chose these types of films as their favourite.
Alright, so I think that was about it. Now let's check our answers here. So adventure for females is about 15%, cartoon is at 4%, so comedy, crime, and horror got no answers whatsoever, so we'll say 0, 0, and 0, right? For other, we'll say 11%, right? Makes sense. What else? Yeah, I think that's about it. Let's go to males. So for males, adventure was again at 28, it was 15 for females, it was 28 for males. Cartoon was at 4, I think. Was at 4. Comedy again 0, 0, and 0. And for other, that'll be around 4. Okay, so 4. Science fiction's at 28%. Love stories 4. Horror 0, 32. And you get the idea, right? So that was completing the tables, you guys. Now let's move on. What do we have here? Here we have skills check, examples, and lists. Right. So when speakers talk, they often use a word or phrase, right, or an explanation, then give an example or examples together. For example, he used traditional categories, that's a word here, or basically a word or a phrase, it depends. So he used traditional categories for film types, right? Such as love story, science fiction, crime, etc., right? Another example, if there are many alright, I did not mean to say that. So, one more point, if there are many examples, speakers end the list with ADC, which stands for etc., or and so on. So, here you can see ADC. ADC means that the examples are not finished or not just based on these, but more, right? So if I say love story, science fiction, crime, I'm missing drama, I'm missing I don't know, cartoon, you get the idea, right? There are many more examples, and that is why we just add etc. as in there are more. Or if I say and so on. If I say and so on, that means that, again, there are more. I'm just not gonna keep saying all of them, right? So what do you do if you don't understand a word or phrase? Let's say, for example, you don't know what traditional categories mean, right? Try to use, again, the words before the word or phrase that you don't know, and check after it. If you still don't know what it means, then just wait for the example, right? You might be able to get a clue of what the word or phrase means once you see some examples or just one example, okay? Well, if the list ends with etc and so on, you can think of more examples because 100% there are more examples, okay? Like I said here, etc. We probably have horror, probably have drama, probably have cartoons missing. You get the idea. Okay, so if you ever see etc. or and so on, just know that there are more examples. Okay, now let's go to exercise E here. This is going to be entirely up to you as a student, right? So what about you? What's your favorite type of film, right? So, up to you guys. What's your favorite type of film? Well, for me, as a type of film, I really like comedy, just because I really think that it's tough for someone to make you laugh, but I do believe that it's easy to make someone sad, right? Like, comedy, like, you really gotta be skilled to make people laugh. That's just my opinion, at least. So, I like comedy films, but as I'm more of a TV shows kind of guy, but hey, I like to watch films from time to time, and comedy ones are fun to watch, okay? What about your favorite type of book? Again, this will be up to you. But for me personally, this is where it gets interesting. I actually like books that teach you how to manage life, right? Things that, or books that after you read them, you think that you've gained so much new information and you just can't wait to start using, and start applying these pieces of information that you learn, right? Whether it's a book about finance, whether it's a book about time management, right? Whether it's a book about self-discipline, all of these books are honestly amazing to me, and they teach us so many things, and I really, really do believe that books of that nature help us, take control or take back control of our life, right? So that was listening, you guys. Now let's move on to speaking. Alright, you guys, so now let's move on to lesson 2, speaking. Here we have some film posters, right? We're going to name the types of films here, and we're going to talk about what do we know about each film, right? So, A is Gladiator, right? That's a film. It's mostly action, adventure. You could also probably say historical, but it is not a true story, okay? Ace Ventura. I think that's actually not one film, but rather a series of films, and it's comedy, right? It has that comedy genre, right? And then we have C, which is Avatar. I think this one's known by everybody. It's obviously science fiction / animation. You could also say action adventure, okay? And then we have Romeo and Juliet. Everybody knows Romeo and Juliet. It's a love story, and it's a film from the play Romeo and Juliet. Okay? And then we have Friday, which is a historical / sort of biography film, right? And finally, we have the Descent, which is a horror film. Okay? So now let's move on to exercise B here. Listen to a conversation. Which film from these films are they talking about? So here, let's have a listen and then decide.
118. Lesson 2. Speaking. Exercise B. Listen to a conversation. Which film are they talking about?
So, what's your favourite film of all time?
I think it's probably...
What type of film is it?
Well, it's a historical drama. But I guess it's an action film too.
What happens?
It's set in Roman times. A soldier becomes a slave. Then he becomes a He becomes the greatest because he's so brave.
Who's in it?
The main character's Russell Crowe.
Oh, really? I like him. How does the film end?
I'm not going to tell you. Watch it.
Perhaps I will.
Right, so based on the audio, I think they're talking about Gladiator, just because they said that it was sort of historical, right? And you could consider it an action film as well. It's set in Roman times, right? How a soldier becomes a slave, and then he becomes a gladiator because he's the greatest. Obviously, that was beeped out, but you get the idea. So we'll definitely say gladiator here, okay? Now, let's move on. What else do we have here? We have look at the conversation. Can you remember the questions? Okay, so we're going to write the questions from the previous audio. But before we do that, I want you guys to listen again. But this time, instead of focusing on which film is it, I want you guys to focus on the missing questions. Okay, so here we go.
119. Exercise C2. Listen again and check. Write the questions into the spaces.
So, what's your favourite film of all time?
I think it's probably Gladiator.
What type of film is it?
Well, it's a historical drama, but I guess it's an action film too.
What happens?
It's set in Roman times. A soldier becomes a slave. Then he becomes a gladiator. He becomes the greatest gladiator because he's so brave.
Who's in it?
The main character's Russell Crowe.
Oh, really? I like him. How does the film end?
I'm not going to tell you. Watch it.
Perhaps I will.
Alright, so I actually wrote some of these down, so we'll say, so, what's your, right, favorite film of all time, right? Favorite film of all time? I think it's possibly Gladiator. What we'll say, what type of film is it? Well, it's a historical drama, but I guess it's an action film too. We'll say, what happens? It's set in Roman times. A soldier becomes a slave, then he becomes a gladiator. He becomes the greatest gladiator because he's so brave. We'll say, who's in it, right? The main character's Russell Crowe. Oh, really? I like him. How does the film end? I'm not going to tell you. Watch it. Perhaps I will. Right? So these were the questions. Now let's move on. Here we have think about fact and possibility. Before we move on here, let's go to skills check. So recognizing or basically finding the difference between a fact and possibility, right? So we give simple facts or just normal facts with the present simple, right? However, you can change facts into possibilities with perhaps or probably. So you guys, what are facts exactly? Facts is basically a statement or phrase that is true, right? It is 100%. It is not a possibility and it is not a theory. It is a fact, something that has happened or will happen or is happening 100%. Okay? That's a fact. What about a possibility? A possibility is something that might happen, right? That might have happened or will be happening, right? So it depends. It's not a simple 100% yes or no like a fact, right? However, you can change a simple fact by using perhaps or the words perhaps or probably. For example, if I say it's set in Roman times, it's a fact. It's 100%. It's set in Roman times. Okay? There's no 90%, 80%. It's set 100% in Roman times. Okay? The main character's Russell Crowe. That means that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and the main character is going to change. It's not how this works, right? So this is a fact 100%. Now, what about a possibility? If I say it's Gladiator, then that's a fact 100%. But the moment I add probably, now it's a possibility. You know, I might have another movie that I really like, but I think that, or probably Gladiator is my favorite movie. That's what a possibility is, basically, in a nutshell, right? Perhaps I will, as in I will watch it, right? Perhaps I will means I most likely will, but I also might not, right? So it just depends, okay? That's the difference between fact and possibility, right? So why do the speakers use probably, perhaps, and I guess in the conversation? Well, they use these words to, express the possibility of something that might happen. Okay? So that's fact and possibility. Now, here we have exercise E, word and pairs, talk about your favorite film. I'm going to go over this quickly because this will be entirely up to you. So choose a film, something that's your favorite. Okay? Answer these questions that we just wrote, right? So what's your favorite film of all time? What type of film is it? What happens? Who's in it? How does the film end? Answer these questions, and if you have someone close by, have a conversation with them, right? You can ask and answer some of these questions and try on swapping roles, right? Instead of talking about your film, let the other person talk about his or her favorite film. Okay? Now, let's move on. Here we have exercise F. Look at the college handout, read it carefully, then cover it, and explain the process to a partner. Alright, so let's read this college handout. Greenhill College, a survey. Do a survey of people in your class or group. Find out their favorite types of story in a film or novel. Put your results in a table and a pie chart. So look at the list of story tables or story types in table 1. Speak to everybody in your class or group. Ask them to put the story types in order of preference, 1 being the favorite type, and write their answers in table 1. Calculate the total for each student and calculate the order. Lowest number is 1 and same number is equal. 5. Calculate the percentage for favorite type. For example, if 2 people out of 5 say crime, that means that 1 percentage is 40%. Compare your results with the other people in your class or group. They should be the same. Then complete table 2, and finally complete figure 1 and label it. Alright? That was pretty complex. Anyway, so you see this right here, this table right here. You'll basically go around your class, if you're in class right now, go and ask about different people and their favorite story types, right? Get their numbers down and basically calculate it, right? Use notes and or basically not notes. There's no need for notes here. Just percentage, right? The percentage and their rank after you write the... Do we have total? Yeah, we do. After you write the total down. For example, I'm going to be making some numbers up here just because I want to show you an example. Here we have crime, so I'll say 1, 6, maybe. 1. Again, these are numbers off the top of my head. Yours will be different. 2, 1, right? I'll also... I mean, it really just depends. So if I say just I'll stop here, right? I'll just ignore all of these. If I say the total here is 11, that'll be rank 1. So that means this will probably be 60%, right? You don't need to go over this too much. It's basically just sort of basically an interesting exercise. What's actually important is this part right here, exercise G. Follow the instructions in the college handout and use some of this language. Could you put these story types in order of preference? Alright, so if you plan on doing this, some of the numbers here, right? I'm going to be taking my own numbers, right? You can use your own or a friend's, or basically your group or class, right? Use some of these here in this pie chart, right after you finish this table right here. So could you put these story types in order of preference? What's your favorite type? What's second? And next, Okay, number 4, 5th place, 6th, and in last place. So that's crime first, horror second. You can use these or some of this language to follow the instructions here, right? For example, crime, I'll say order 1 for me. Love story, I'll give it a 4. Science fiction's at 5. Excuse me. Comedy, I'll say comedy's at 5 as well. Historical, 3. Horror at 7, and adventures at 2, right? So for the biggest 3 out of all of them, I'll say crime, taking the biggest, so up until here probably, right? Historical will be this part, and the rest will be adventure. Alright? So I think that's about it. Yeah, so that was speaking, you guys. Now let's move on to vocab and pronunciation. Alright, you guys, so now let's move on to lesson 3, vocabulary and pronunciation. Let's hop right into exercise A. Here we have work in teams and look at the film and book quiz. Okay, so this first exercise, it's going to be purely up to you and your research, right? So I want you guys to work in teams if you're in class, but if you're alone, that's fine, right? Open up your computer, or I'm guessing you are already on your computer or phone if you're looking at this, right? See these pictures and these questions. I want you guys to pause the video and go do some research and try to answer these, right? So I'll just answer them right away because I already did my research. So who is the film director in picture A? Right, so this guy right here, I think he was called Steven Spielberg. Okay, so he's a film director and he's the one in picture A, right? So Steven Spielberg. Okay, and I wrote it as Steven. Wow, Steven Spielberg. Right, who directed the films Psycho, The Birds, and Rear Window? Well, who was the director? The director was Alfred Hitchcock. So Alfred Hitchcock. Okay. C, what is the name of the character in picture B? So this character right here is called Don Quixote. So we'll say Don. We'll write it like so. Okay? Then we have D. Who wrote the novels of The House of the Spirits and City of the Beasts? That was Isabel Allende. So we'll say Isabel Allende. Okay? And then we have E. Which country were the authors Tolstoy and Dostoevsky from? Well, Russia. You can tell by the name. Russia. F. Which actress played the role of Maria Elena in Vicky Cristina Barcelona? Penelope Cruz? Yeah, Penelope Cruz. Okay? Whose biography or autobiography is called The Greatest? This one I know, Muhammad Ali, so say Muhammad Ali. Okay? And H, who is the actor in picture C? This one's pretty simple. That's Colin Firth. So Colin Firth. Oh, my bad. Colin Firth. Okay? Now let's move on. What do we have here? Here we have exercise B. Study the pairs of sentences below. Alright, before we move on, let me just open a skills check here so you guys can get a better view. So, we have something in English called homophones. So, what are homophones exactly? Well, when two words in English have the same sound but a different spelling, we call them homophones. Let me tell you what I mean. So, here we have the word see and see, right? Here we have see, which means seeing something with your eyes, right? While see, as in water, right? See, the sea, you get it, right? So they sound exactly the same, but the spelling is different. That is what homophones are, basically, okay? Again, meet, as in the meat that you eat, and meet as in a meeting that you have at a company or at work or at school, whatever. Okay? So let's go to exercise B. We're going to listen now to this audio here, and we have some underlined words. What do they have in common? Let's take a look.
121. Lesson 3. Vocabulary and Pronunciation. Exercise B1. Listen. What do the underlined words have in common?
A.
It's a fantastic film. Go and see it.
I went swimming in the sea last week.
B. Kim Basinger played the role of Eminem's mother in 8 Mile.
I had a cheese roll for lunch.
Alright, so what these words have in common is that they're all homophones, right? Because same sound but different spelling, okay? Here you can see we have the word see and see. Well, in the first sentence it means see as in to see something, right? But for the second one it's water as in swimming, okay? Kim Basinger played the role of Eminem's mother in 8 Mile. Great movie, by the way. Highly recommend. Well, role as in, right, the role of someone, right? Your role in a movie, in a job, or at a job, whatever, okay? While I had a cheese roll, you know that roll, you know the saying, you gotta roll out of bed when you wake up? Yeah, that's basically it, that rolling that you do. That's what it means. Again, same sound but different spelling, okay? Now, here for B3, we have add homophones to the table. So we're gonna add homophones to each one here. So for meat, this one's pretty simple. We'll say meat, but with a double E. So meat, meat, right? Right, again, same, but we'll say right. Sun, sun, right? And I'll explain what the differences are in a second. No, you can also say no. Where, right? Made, made. Buy, you could say buy, or you could also say buy. Both are correct. Sail and sail, right? Meat here is the meat that you eat, animal meat, and meat here is a meaning, like we said. Write and write. Here, write means to write something down, and right here means right or wrong, okay? Sun and sun. Sun here is the sun, the star in our galaxy, and sun here is someone's son, right? No and no, right? No here means no, the opposite of yes, and no here means you know something, right? Where and where is it as in a question word, and here where means to wear clothes, right? Made means it was made, right? It was produced in a certain place, and here made is the people that help with cleaning and whatever when it comes to hotels, etc. Buy, and buy. Okay, so here buy someone, right? So because of someone, not because, just buy. I hope you get the idea. And buy here means to buy something with money, and buy here means goodbye, right? Sail, right? Sail means to sail in the sea, and sale here means discounts or whatever that shops make. Okay? So these are homophones in a nutshell. Now let's move on. What do we have? Here we have C, study the words. Alright, before we do that, again, let's take a look here at skills check. Something called group words. So, the word color, you guys, why is it called a group word? Well, it's called a group word because there are many words in the group, right, in the word itself. So when I say color, I'm not being specific, right? Am I talking about yellow, green, perhaps blue, maybe red, white, or black, or brown? So many colors, right? But the general term for yellow, green, blue, blue, all of that is color, right? So that word is called a group word, right? Same thing with season, right? If I say season, I'm not being specific. I don't know if I'm talking about spring, I'm talking about summer, maybe fall, or winter. I don't know. So that is, again, a group word. Well, you got to know that group words are very useful, because if you don't remember the exact word, let's say, for example, take blue or summer or whatever, right? And let's say you forgot about that. Well, group words can help you. Basically, you could use the group word instead of the term itself, right? And that is why they are useful, right? It's a color instead of it's red and yellow. You get the idea. It's a kind of shop. It sells houses. Okay? So these are some examples. Now, here we have some words. We're going to study them and find pairs of words. Right. So film, we'll say film comedy. Okay? Film comedy, right? Again, film is a group word, or movie is a group word. For what? Well, for genres, different genres. So, for example, comedy, action, love story, horror, crime. You get the idea, right? Meat, we already said this one. We'll say chicken, right? Again, different types of meat, right? So chicken, beef, pork, lamb, buffalo, I don't know, etc. You get the idea, right? Color, we just said that one, so we'll say yellow. We can also say red, green, brown, black, white. You get the idea, okay? Sport, sport will be football, but you could also add things like tennis, golf, right? Athletics, basketball, baseball. All of these are types of sports. Job, lawyer. But what are other jobs, you guys? We have teacher, secretary, a bus driver, right? A professor, a doctor. All of these are jobs. Season. Well, we have autumn here. Okay, but what else do we have? Well, we have spring, we have summer, and we have winter. Planet. Okay, so planet Mars. There are other planets. So we can say Uranus, Venus, Mars, Earth, Pluto. All of these are other planets. Shop. Shop, bakery. Other types of shops. We can say bookshop, supermarket, butchers, etc. Right? Month, June. Well, any of the other months as well. We can say July, August, December, November, January, February, March. You get the idea, right? March. Drink, juice. Well, you could drink milk, Coke, beer, juice, etc. Right? So what's the relation between all of these? Well, all of these are group words, and these are basically a small portion of the group of words that fall under these group words. Okay? So that was the relationship between these words. Now let's move on. What do we have here? Look at the word sets below. Choose one set and write words for the word set. Okay, so choose any one of these if you're in class, but if not, write all of them. Right? I'll do all of them right now. Now, here we have parts of the body, right? So again, there are so many parts of the body, so write them down, right? Different parts of the body, right? As much as you can. So, right? So we have hand, we can say arm, shoulder, nose, mouth, ears, eyes, legs, knees. All of these are parts of the body. You get the idea. Furniture, chair, we could say big chair, sofa, I don't know what else, a small table maybe? All of these, small sofa, all of these are parts of furniture. Buildings, we have church, mosques, law firms, for example, companies or factories. All of these are houses, right? All of these are examples of buildings, right? Motor vehicles, car, motorboats. You can also say ships, airplanes, anything else? Yeah, motorbikes. So all of these are examples of motor vehicles. Relations, Sister, brother, father, mother, stepsister, well, aunt, uncle, cousin, all of these are relations. Diseases, well, wow, okay, so cancer, you can also say HIV, right? The common cold, that is also a virus. Anything else? Leukemia, maybe? And yeah. Now we have clothes. Okay, shirt, t-shirt, jeans, joggers, hoodies, jackets, ties, wife beaters. All of these are examples of clothes. School subjects. Well, this one's pretty simple. Math, physics, chemistry. I don't know what else. History, maybe. Yeah, history, IT. You get the idea, right? Many different school subjects. So yeah, I think that was about it for vocab and pronunciation. Now let's move on. Alright, you guys, so now let's move on to lesson 4 reading, and we have exercise A, prepare to read the text opposite. So read the heading, can you answer the question? This is the heading, by the way, obviously. So who wrote the most famous stories in English literature? So this will be up to you. Who do you think wrote the most famous stories in English literature? For me, it's Shakespeare, without a doubt, right? That's just the only logical name that comes to mind when it comes to the most famous stories in English literature. Okay? Now let's go to A2 here. Read the introduction. What is the text about? So this is the introduction. So, do you like love stories? What about horror stories? Crime novels or science fiction? Or do you prefer a good adventure novel? Read about the most famous novel in your favorite or a favorite genre. Alright, so what is the introduction about exactly here? Well, the introduction is about the most famous novel genres, right? Or basically different novel genres, but here we basically have summaries of the most famous novels, right? In each genre, whether it's, I don't know, crime, horror, science fiction, right? Or adventure. Okay? What order will the information be in? Why? And check with the illustrations. So here we have a few illustrations, some pictures here, and based on these illustrations, we'll probably say that it'll go like this. Like 1, love story, obviously, the first genre, and then crime, and then what do we call this? Yeah, this is horror, right? 4 will be science fiction or sci-fi, and 5 is an adventure story. Okay? So that's the order of the information in the text. So B, scan the text, find the 2 names of 2 authors, find 2 book titles, find the names of 2 story characters, and then read the skills check. Okay, so before we do any of that, let's go to the skills check down here first. Identifying titles and characters, right? So you gotta know that titles in texts in English are often in italics or in quotation marks, and you'll notice that right now when we start reading the text, right? So for example, Frankenstein, right, in italics, so not the normal writing of the text that you see, or between quotation marks, such as here, the time machine. Okay? You also gotta know that we use capital letters for nouns, verbs, pronouns, and adjectives in titles, right? So if it's up here, anything that's basically a noun, verb, pronoun, or adjective is gonna be in capital or a capital letter. So we print the names of real people and characters in novels the same exact way, right? So here you can see it's in bold, and that is how you print it, right? When it comes to names of real people and characters in novels, this is how we do it, right? So Mark Twain was born in 1835. Mary Shelley died in 1851. What about people in novels, a character, for example? So a poor boy called Tom Sawyer, right? A scientist called Dr. Frankenstein, okay? So this is how you print it, okay? Now let's go back to exercise B. this is sort of a way to, I'm sure you guys have heard of skimming and scanning when it comes to reading. So I'm not going to read it just yet. I want you guys to pause the video right now, right? Go to the text and just quickly try to find what it's asking here. So for example, find the names of two authors. I want you guys to try find any two authors. It doesn't matter. So for example here, I already found one. Here we have Jane Austen, right? That's one author. Anything else? Well, probably Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So here we go. Conan Doyle, that's two. Okay? And what else do we have? Find two book titles. Again, first one I found was the Pride and Prejudice. Okay? Or Pride and Prejudice. What about he wrote The Time Machine. Here we have The Time Machine. Okay? So again, we found it quickly and I didn't have to read the whole text. Excuse me, sorry. Find the names of two story characters. Okay. We'll say most famous, including Elizabeth Bennet, right? So that's one, right? Meets a man called Darcy. That's two story characters right there. So Elizabeth Bennet meets a man called Darcy. Darcy is obviously a story character. Okay? I think that's about it. Yeah, so now let's move on to exercise C, which is, now we're going to have to read the text because this is going to be a lot of work. So we're going to have to find the writer, when was he or she born, when did he or she die, their novel titles, dates, and the main character or person in the story or novel based on these different genres. So we have love story, crime, horror, sci-fi or science fiction, and adventure. So I'm going to read the text right now. If you guys are in class, it's best if you guys go into groups, right? So basically each group can take a genre, but if not, hey, you can do it on your own just like I will right now. So let's start by reading the text. Who wrote the most famous stories in English literature? Do you like love stories? What about horror stories? Crime novels or science fiction? Or do you prefer a good adventure novel? Read about the most famous novel in your favorite genre. The most famous love story in English literature is probably Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. She was born in the south of England in 1775 and died in 1817, aged 41. She wrote 6 famous novels, including Pride and Prejudice in 1813. It is set in early 19th century England. Elizabeth Bennet meets a man called Darcy. She hates him at first, but slowly falls in love with him. The most famous detective in English literature is probably Sherlock Holmes, in the short stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Doyle was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1859 and died in 1930, aged 71. He wrote the Holmes stories between 1887 and 1927. They are set in Victorian England. In each story, something strange happens and Holmes, a private detective, solves the crime. Perhaps the most famous horror story in English literature is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. She was born in London in 1797 and died in 1851, aged 54. She wrote Frankenstein in 1818. It is set in the 19th century in Germany, Switzerland, and England. A scientist called Dr. Frankenstein makes a man from parts of dead people. He brings it to life with electricity. The monster is unhappy and does terrible things. Perhaps the most famous science fiction story in English literature is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. He was born in the south of England in 1866 and died in 1946, aged 79. He wrote The Time Machine in 1895. The novel is set in Victorian England. A scientist called the Time Traveler makes a machine that can move a person to any time in the past or the future. The main character has many adventures before he destroys the machine. The most famous adventure story in English literature could be The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. He was born in the south of the United States in 1835 and died in 1910, aged 74. He wrote Tom Sawyer between 1874 and 1875. It is set in Missouri, Twain's home state. In about 1845, a poor boy called Tom Sawyer has many adventures before he finds a treasure of $12,000 and becomes rich. Alright, so that was the text, you guys. Now let's check out the table here. So for love story, what's the writer here from the text? I think we'll say Jane Austen. Yes. So Jane Austen. And I wrote that wrong. Jane Austen. Okay? Excuse me. And I think she was born in 1775. Okay? And she died in 1817. Yeah, so 1817, right? Her novel title was Pride and Prejudice. Okay? And it came out in 1813, right? 1813. Excuse me, I have a really bad cold. Sorry about that. And the main person in the love story was Elizabeth Bennet right here. So we'll say Elizabeth Bennet. Okay? Now moving on to crime. We'll say Conan Doyle as the writer. Conan Doyle. He was born, when was he born? Nope. Actually, I think it was around Conan Doyle, 1859, right? And died at around 1930. Alright? So, novel title, we actually don't know that. So, Conan Doyle, crime, is probably Sherlock Holmes in the short stories. So these are short stories by, so we don't know the novel title, so this will be a question mark. Okay? What about the date? I think the date was from 1887 to 1927. So we'll say 1887 to 1927. Okay? And the main person was obviously Sherlock Holmes. Now moving on to horror. Obviously the name of the famous author, Mary Shelley. So we'll say Mary Shelley. She was born in, let me check, 1797, right? So she was born in 1797 and she died in 1851. Okay, so Mary Shelley, born in 1797 and died in 1851. Her novel title was Frankenstein, right? Frankenstein. Date, I think it came out 1818, right? If I recall correctly, let me check just to be sure. Yes, 1818. And the main person was obviously Dr. Frankenstein. Frankenstein. Okay? And then we have sci-fi. I think it was H.G. Wells. Yes. So H.G. Wells. Okay? He was born in 1866. 1866, and he died in 1946. And his novel title was The Time Machine. Okay? The date was, I think it was 1895. Yeah, so 1895. And the main person was obviously the time traveler. So we'll say the time traveler. I think that's how he goes. People call him that. And finally, we have adventure. Mark Twain. So we'll say Mark Twain. Born, let me check. Born in 1835 and died in 1910. So born in, we'll say 1835 in 1910. Right? Novel title, Tom Sawyer. Okay. And the date, I think it was from 1874 to 1875. 1875. And the main person was obviously Tom Sawyer. Okay, so that was the table, you guys. Love story, Jane Austen. 1775, 1817. Pride and Prejudice, date 1813, and the main person Elizabeth Bennet, or Bennet. Crime, Conan Doyle, 1859, 1930, 1887 to 1927. Main person Sherlock Holmes. Horror, Mary Shelley, 1797 to 1851. Novel title Frankenstein, date 1818. Dr. Frankenstein is the main person. Science fiction, H.G. Wells, from 1866 to 1946. Novel title The Time Machine, date 1895. Main person The Time Traveler. Adventure, writer is Mark Twain, born in 1835 and died in 1910. Novel titles Tom Sawyer, date from 1874 to 1875, and obviously the main person's Tom Sawyer. Okay, that was exercise C, you guys. Now let's move on. Here we have read your text again, identify the summary of the story, right? Learn the summary and check the meaning of new words. And if you're in a group, give the summary and explain these new words. All right, so here it's kind of, we sort of have a summary, but what I would like for you guys to do is make your own summary of the story if you can, like write a summary, right? And if you see any new words along the way, just put them on the side, right? Make a list of words on the side of the page with all of these new words. Now that's all good, but once you're done, I want you to go and talk about that summary, right? You could use phrases such as at first, or once he or she falls in love with, for example, also strange, private detective, solve a crime. These are all phrases that you can use. Other phrases and words can include probably, you can say monster, brings it to life, right? Machine, destroyed, poor, treasure. All of these are words and phrases that you can use to your advantage when explaining new words and explaining the summary of the story. Okay? So do that. And what else do we have? Do we have anything else? Yeah, no, I think that's about it. So that was reading, you guys. Now let's move on. Alright, you guys, so now moving on to lesson 5, writing and grammar. Let's hop right in. So here we have exercise A. Look again at the story summaries. Well, that's interesting. Restart. Whatever. So look again at the story summaries, right? We're gonna underline the verbs, and then we're gonna identify which tense is used for a story summary. Read the skills check, and then write a brief summary of a story, just basically any story that you know well. Well, let's first start by underlining the verbs. So we have a scientist called Dr. Frankenstein makes a man from parts of dead people. He brings it to life with electricity. The monster is unhappy and does terrible things. Well, let's go one more time. So a scientist called Dr. Frankenstein makes, that's a verb, a man from parts of dead people. He brings it to life. Well, brings it is going to be a verb. Brings it to life with electricity. The monster is unhappy and does terrible things. Does will be the verb as well. Okay? Summary 2. The novel is set in Victorian England. So First one is a verb. A scientist called the time traveler makes a machine, so makes will be a verb. It can will be a verb, move a person to any time in the past or the future. The main character has many adventures, has is a verb, many adventures before he destroys the machine. Destroys is also a verb. Okay? So now let's go to 2 here. Which tense is used for a short summary? And we'll know that by checking the skills check here. So summarizing stories. You guys got to know that when summarizing basically a story of a book or film, we use the present simple. What? Okay? And for the reason for that is because we're not really telling a story of our own. We're just saying what happens, right? For example, it's set in Roman times. A soldier becomes a slave, then he becomes a gladiator, right? Dr. Frankenstein makes a man from parts of dead people. He brings it to life. I can't say he's bringing it to life, right? It's something that already happened, right? So we'll say here present simple. Present simple. Okay? So again, we underline the verbs. We use the present simple when writing a summary about a movie or about a novel, etc. Right? Now, before we move on, I want you guys to write just a simple summary, like so, of any story that you know well. Anything that you know, just write it. Okay? I mean, after all, this is a writing lesson. So write a brief summary, and then let's move on. Okay? So the verbs, again, one more time. Makes, brings, and does. And for number 2, we have is, makes, can, has, and destroys. Okay? And the tense is present simple. Okay, now let's move on. Here we have read and complete the text with the name of the play and author. Okay, let me open this here. So this one's pretty simple. So we're going to complete the text here with the name of the play and the author. So obviously this is William Shakespeare. So let's take a look. Perhaps the most famous play in English literature is dash by dash. Okay, so we'll say Romeo, right? And Juliet. I think everybody knows what that is. Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. And I wrote that wrong. Yep, got that right. By William Shakespeare. He was born in Central England in 1564 and died in London in 1616, aged 52. He probably wrote the play in 1597, but nobody's sure. It is a love story set in the 16th century in Italy. Dash are in love, so again, we'll say Romeo and Juliet are in love, but they cannot be together because their families hate each other. At the end of the play, they both die. Wow, what a way to spoil it for anybody that does not know or doesn't know about Romeo and Juliet. Alright, so that was pretty simple. Completing the text with the name of the play and the author. So Romeo and Juliet and William Shakespeare. Right, now let's move on to exercise C here. Here we have some words, and we're going to try numbering the boxes to make a sentence. So number the boxes in the correct order. So we have most, love, the, famous, is, Romeo and Juliet, story, and history. Okay, so for 1 we can say the most famous love story in history is Romeo and Juliet, right? Again, so the most famous love story in history is Romeo and Juliet. Okay? One more, I could use a different style. I could probably say Romeo and Juliet is the most famous love story in history. Okay? So I can say it in 2 different ways. 2, where can you put the word in the green box in the sentences? Alright, so I want to add probably. So I'll probably say the most famous love story in history is probably Romeo and Juliet. Or I could also say Romeo and Juliet is probably the most famous love story in history. So again, I can say it both ways. What about the word in the blue box? Yeah, we're going to add probably and perhaps. Well, no, we'll just add perhaps, not probably. We can't add both. So we'll say perhaps the most famous love story in history is Romeo and Juliet. Or I could also say Romeo and Juliet is perhaps the most famous love story in history. Right? So I'll say the three different styles one more time and then we'll move on. Right? So 1, the most famous love story in history is Romeo and Juliet. Or Romeo and Juliet is the most famous love story in history. 2, the most famous love story in history is probably Romeo and Juliet. Or Romeo and Juliet is probably the most famous love story in history. 3, perhaps the most famous love story in history is Romeo and Juliet. Or Romeo and Juliet is perhaps the most famous love story in history. Alright, so that was pretty simple. Let's move on. Here we have D. Write a simple paragraph about the most famous writer in your country and one of his or her stories. Right, so I want you guys to take out your notebooks, right, and just simply write a paragraph about the most famous writer in your country, okay? So a famous writer in your country. Do some research if you don't know. And one of his or her stories. This will be up to you, but make sure you write this paragraph, okay? Now let's move on. What do we have here? E. Read about comedy films and write notes in the table. Alright, so here we have notes, and we're gonna write about comedy films here, this text, in the exact same way. So let's start. We'll start by reading this here. So comedy films. The most famous comedy films in history are probably the ones with Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin was born in 1889 in London. He made his first film called Making a Living in 1914. He made more than 75 films. He made more than 75 films. He died in Switzerland in 1977, aged 88. In most of his films, Chaplin plays a person with a funny walk, a hat, and a stick. He has a lot of trouble, but he always gets the girl. Alright, so let's write some notes here in the table. So for name, we'll say Charlie Chaplin, right? Born, I think he was born in 1889 in London, England. When did he die? 88? Yes, aged 88. Okay. First film was Making a Living. I remember that one. Date, 1914. Number, I think it was movie number 75. And info about the film, well, info about his films will probably say, for most of his films, he was a person with a funny walk, hat, and a stick, and always has trouble but gets the girl. Okay, similar to Disney here. Here we have Walt Disney, right, born in 1901, Chicago, U.S., died 1966, Florida, U.S., age 65, first film, Tommy Tucker's Tooth, date 1922, number 600, and info about his films, Many Have Mouse, while Mickey and his friends, Minnie, Mouse, and Pluto, the dog, and Donald Duck. Alright? So now, well, you could write another paragraph, right, about the notes here that we got. I'd say write about Walt Disney, but you could choose between Charlie Chaplin and Walt Disney. Okay, so just write a simple paragraph from the notes above. Okay? And what do we have here? G, read the typical sentences from love stories. Which are direct speech and how did you know? Okay. So, here we have Martha was very unhappy. She didn't speak to Henry ever again. B, Charles and Daphne talked for hours. Goodbye for now, David said. Do you still love me? Janet asked. I don't love you anymore, Margaret told Ralph. Well, which ones are direct speech? I think I think C, right? So goodbye for now, David said. And D, do you still love me? Janet said. And E as well, so I don't love you anymore, Margaret told Ralph. So C, D, and E. And how did I know that? I know that because, well, you'll know that the direct speech is within the inverted commas, right? So here you can see the inverted commas. That means it's a direct speech, right? Number 2, what is the difference in meaning between the underlined verbs? So here we have speak and talk. Well, speak and talk are very similar, you guys, right? Matter of fact, they could be swapped in the first 2 sentences, right? It's just that talk normally implies about more of a conversation, right? 2 people are involved. Well, let me give you a look. So if I say Martha was very unhappy, she didn't talk to Henry ever again, I mean, it's still correct. Nothing wrong with it, right? And if I say Charles and Daphne spoke for hours, it's also correct. It's just that talk implies more of a conversation. That's all. Okay? What about said and asked? So we'll say, and well, say here simply means that words came out, right? That's why you don't say you say he said hello, and you don't say he told hello, right? That is how you do it. So say just simply means that words came out of someone's mouth, right? So he said hello, he said what's up, not he told, okay? So told in this case is wrong, right? Now we know that the word ask is used for questions, right? That's just that. Now, tell, okay, comes from told here. Tell actually suggests that information is given, right? So it's not like say, where the words exactly came out, it's information is given. Like a person giving information to another. That is when you use tell. And for say, you guys gotta know when talking. Well, let me go here for 3. What is the difference grammatically between say and tell? So the difference between say and tell is that say has only a direct object, right? You say something and that's it, right? But for tell, it has a direct and indirect object. So you can tell somebody something. And that is how you differentiate between the 2. Alright? So say, again, one more time. Say has a direct object where you say something and that's it. While tell has a direct and indirect object, so you can tell somebody something. Okay? I told you not to do it. Okay? But for say, I can probably say, he said what's up. He said hello. He said good morning. I can't say he told good morning. Alright? Now, let's move on to exercise G. Read the sentences below. Complete them with a verb from exercise G. Oh, this should be pretty simple. I love her with all my heart. Simon dash his friend. Well, Simon, tell, so we'll change that to told. Okay, so Simon told his friends. Okay? Will you marry me? Liam dash Elizabeth. Asked Elizabeth. By the way, I don't know if you guys noticed, but clearly the sentences here are missing the punctuation, right? So just keep that in mind. So, will you marry me? Liam asked Elizabeth, right? C. Goodbye, Jim. Sandra dash, and they never dash again. Well, goodbye, Jim. Sandra said, right? Because that's what she said. And they never spoke again. Or they never talked again. Both are correct, okay? That's what I was talking about. D. Graham is the man for me. Sally dash. Or Sally dash Barbara. He dash about things I understand. If there was no Barbara, we could have said, right? The word said. So Graham is the man for me, Sally said. But because we have another person, that totally changes everything. So now, instead of saying said, we'll say told, coming from tell. So Graham is the man for me, Sally told Barbara. He talks about things I understand. Okay? Again, he talks about things I understand. So that was completing the verbs from exercise G. Now let's move on, you guys. Alright, you guys, so now moving on to the final 2 pages of writing and grammar in this lesson here. We have exercise A, read the start of some stories. So let us take a look here. What type of story is each one? Okay, so we're going to read all of them. And as we go, I want you guys to just write some notes about what type of story is each one, right? So A, Cinderella was doing the housework. She was washing the kitchen floor and cooking lunch at the same time. She was singing to herself. Suddenly, somebody tapped at the door and a letter dropped onto the mat. B, the sun was shining, but there was a large black cloud coming towards the 2 men. They were climbing fast, but the hill was very steep. Suddenly, the rain started. C, she was running fast, but the creature was getting closer. Her heart was beating faster than ever before. She looked right, left, and right. The walls were high. Suddenly, she saw a door in the wall on the right. D, Jenny was lying on her bed. She was holding her phone in her hand, but it wasn't ringing. She was hoping with all her heart that Paul wasn't angry with her. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. E, people were having fun in the park. Some were playing ball games and others were flying kites. A few people were rowing boats on the lake. Suddenly, a large shape appeared in the sky. People stopped and looked up. Alright, hope you got the different types of stories here. So A is definitely a fairy tale, right? B is adventure. C, I think C is actually horror. Yeah, she was scared. D was a love story. And E was science fiction, or is science fiction. Okay? Find 2 verb forms, number them 1 and 2. Alright, before we do that, let's go to skills check here. Right, so when we're talking about past tenses, you guys, in a story, there are 2 main past tenses that are used. We have the past continuous and the past simple. So past continuous is when you say, she was reading, right? They were reading a book. Past simple is when you simply change the whole thing, like she got up and went instead of go, and she went out, right? So when do we use each one exactly? Well, we use the past continuous to set the scene, so at the beginning of the story, right? Or to set a scene. For example, Cinderella was doing the housework, right? I can't say Cinderella done the housework. That's not how it works. So Cinderella was doing the housework. She was washing the kitchen floor. Okay? Now, when do we use the past simple? We use the past simple for if simple events in the story, like suddenly somebody tapped at the door. A letter dropped onto the mat. I don't say a letter was dropping onto the mat. No. Okay? So again, one more time. The past continuous is used to set the scene at the start of the story. This is obviously past tenses in stories. And past simple for events in the story. Okay? Now, let's go back. So in this case, you guys, past continuous will be labeled as number 1, and past simple will be labeled as number 2, right? So let's go back to A one more time. So Cinderella was doing the housework. Was doing here is the past continuous. She was washing, again, past continuous. The kitchen floor and cooking, again, past continuous. Lunch at the same time. She was singing, that is one more past continuous, to herself. Suddenly, somebody tapped, that is gonna be past simple. Okay? So tapped, past simple, at the door, and a letter dropped. Again, past simple, onto the mat. B, the door was shining, right? So past continuous, you guys. But there was a large black cloud coming towards the two men. They were climbing, again, past continuous, fast, but the hill was very steep. Suddenly, the rain started. Well, past simple. Okay, so started here is a past simple. See, she was running, past continuous, fast, but the creature was getting, again, past continuous, closer. Her heart was beating, again, past continuous, faster than ever before. She looked, well, past simple, left and right. The walls were high. Suddenly, she saw here will be past simple, a door in the wall on the right. D. Jenny was lying, again, past continuous, on her bed. She was holding, past continuous, her phone in her hand, but it wasn't ringing. Again, past continuous. She was hoping, past continuous, with all her heart that Paul wasn't angry with her. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Also, that's actually interesting because D does not have any past simple tenses here. Okay? E. People were having, past continuous, fun in the park. Some were playing, again, past continuous, ball games, and others were flying, again, past continuous, kites. A few people were rowing boats on the lake, where rowing here is past continuous. Suddenly, a large shape appeared. Appear is past simple, in the sky. People stopped, again, past simple, and looked up. Again, that's past simple. Okay? So, that is basically the two verbs in a nutshell, or the two past tenses, in a nutshell. Okay? So now let's go to exercise B. This one's pretty simple. Pause the video and write your own start to a story, right? So choose any kind of story, choose your own genre, whatever you like, right? Set a scene in your head and think about what will happen in your story. And then start writing about your story, and you can get some ideas from these different stories here, or parts of stories, right? And write something similar using the two past tenses that we just practiced. Okay? Now let's move on to exercise C. Read the first paragraph of a story, and we're going to put the brackets in place or in their correct form. Let us take a look here. So, they fly at about 50 meters, so they were flying at about 50 meters. The pilot checked the height, then dashed the landing engines, then started the landing engines. She dashed to the crew, she spoke to the crew, we dash land, or we are landing, right? She said. That's what she said. Prepare yourselves. The spaceship dashed softly on the surface of the moon. So the spaceship landed softly on the surface of the moon. The pilot dashed the engines. We'll say stopped, past simple. The engines. I dash the doors now. I am opening the doors now. She told the crew. Okay? So that's the verbs with the correct form. So again, they were flying at about 50 meters. The pilot checked the height, then started the landing engines. She spoke to the crew. We are landing, she said. Prepare yourselves. The spaceship landed softly on the surface of the moon. The pilot stopped the engines. I'm opening the doors now, she told the crew. Okay, so that was exercise C. Now let's move on. What do we have here? All right, here we have exercise D. Let us take a look here. Study the sentences in the box and find the mistakes and correct them. All right, so before we do that, let's go to skills check 2 here. Now, something called reflexive pronouns. Okay, so when I want to talk about myself, right? So you noticed how I said myself and not me. I don't say I want to talk about me. I say myself. You notice that? That is called a reflexive pronoun, right? I hurt myself yesterday. I never say I hurt me yesterday, right? If an author is writing a novel, you'll notice that if he wants to talk about a character talking about herself, he'll say, for example, a phrase that the character said, and then he'll say, Jack said to himself. An author never writes or says Jack said to Jack. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? So you never say Jack said to Jack, but rather Jack said to himself, or Anna said to herself or told herself, okay? You get the idea basically, which is you never use, when talking about yourself, you have to use reflexive pronouns. So let's take a look here. So in English, we do not say I said to me, right? That's what I just said. Never use me here. So I said to me, but rather myself, right? So this is called a reflexive pronoun, which is a looking back basically pronoun for each person, right? So if the subject is I, as in you, and the object is me, right? And that's for reflexive, that'll be myself, okay? So I, object me, and reflexive myself. Subject, you, the object you, singular, not plural, careful. Reflexive will be yourself. Again, subject, he, object, him, reflexive, himself. If it's a she, then object will be her, right? And reflexive will be herself. Okay? So when do you use the reflexive pronoun? Well, use it when the subject is the same as the object. Let me elaborate, right? So here we have he cut himself, right? So if you want to talk about yourself, right, the subject here is going to be the same as the object. Always use reflexive pronouns. He cut himself. You can't say he cut him. That just means you're probably talking about someone else. So he cut himself. She said to herself. Okay? Again, she said to herself and he cut himself. That's basically it for reflexive pronouns. Now let's go back to the exercise. Find the mistakes and correct them. Okay. I looked at me in the mirror. Where is the problem, you guys? Well, me here is wrong. It should be myself, right? So I looked at myself in the mirror. 2. A. Did anyone help Jim? No, he did all the work. Him. Well, him is wrong. It'll be himself, right? He did all the work himself. I really do love him. Emma said to Emma. This is where it gets people kind of, well, maybe he's talking to another Emma. No, that makes no sense whatsoever. So Emma said to herself. Okay? Just avoid any confusion when it comes to this. It's really simple, reflexive pronouns. Okay? So again, one more time. I looked at myself in the mirror. Did anyone help Jim? No, he did all the work himself. I really do love him, Emma said to herself. Okay? That was exercise D. What do we have? We have D3. Cover the skills check and complete table 1. Okay, what is table 1? Okay, so we have the subject pronoun, verb, and we're going to complete the reflexive pronoun. So I saw dash in the mirror. We'll say myself in the mirror. You saw, we'll say yourself in the mirror. He saw, we'll say himself in the mirror. She saw herself in the mirror. Well, we will say we saw ourselves in the mirror. You, as in plural and not singular, you saw yourselves, okay, in the mirror. They saw themselves in the mirror. Okay? So that's D3. Again, I saw myself, you saw yourself, he saw himself, she saw herself, we saw ourselves, you, as in plural, yourselves, saw yourselves, and they saw themselves. Okay? Now let's go to D4. Yep, so covered skills check and table 1, and we're gonna write, what do we have? Write the correct reflexive pronoun in each space. Okay. So do you ever talk to, we'll say yourself, right? We painted the house, plural, so ourselves. I heard Dash playing football. I heard myself playing football. I cannot say me here, you guys. I can't say I heard me playing football, okay? Sometimes student asks Dash, how can I do better in this subject? Sometimes student asks themselves, how can I do better in this subject? Okay? So again, do you ever talk to yourself? We painted the house ourselves. I heard myself playing football. Sometimes students ask themselves, how can I do better in this subject? Okay, so that is D4. And I think, yeah, that's it for exercise D. Now let's move on to the final exercise here. Exercise E, read the sentences and circle the correct word or phrase in each case. Right, this is basically an ending exercise to finish this part off. So, probably it was, or it was probably her best novel. Well, pretty simple. It was probably is the correct one. Perhaps I'll read it later. I'll perhaps read it later. Well, perhaps I'll read it later is the correct one. Sarah said, I like it here, or Sarah said us, I like it here. Well, said us, that's not a phrase. 4, I don't care, or Martin, or I don't care, Martin told Mary, or told to Mary. You can never say told to, so told Mary is the correct one. Who are you speaking, or who are you speaking to? I'm being specific, so I'll say speaking to. Lucy told or said Mark her phone number. Well, I can't. It doesn't make sense to say said Mark her phone number, so told Mark her phone number. I taught myself English by reading. Myself, we just talked about this. And finally, Tom and Lucy asked themselves, is this really what we want? Well, plural, 2 people, so themselves. Again, one more time, so it was probably her best novel. Perhaps I'll read it again later, or read it later. Sarah said, I like it here. I don't care, Martin told Mary. Who are you speaking to? Lucy told Mark her phone number. I taught myself English by reading. And finally, Tom and Lucy asked themselves, is this really what we want? Alright, so that was, I think that's it. Yeah, so thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.